In a world where jobs are how most people make money, one man, one desire, one challenge dares to break the mold. Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network, where we don't work for money. Money works for us. Coming soon. Viewer discretion advised.
Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network, where cash flow is king. Real estate investing, the means, so you can enjoy your retirement dreams. This is the show where we cut right to the chase. No sales pitch, no long monologues, just simple how-to real estate investing advice, so you can earn the passive income you need to enjoy your retirement today. And now, your host and chief old dog, Bill Manacero.
Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network. I'm your host, Bill Manacero, and this is the show where 50-plussers and anyone else who wants to join us get solid, no sales pitch real estate investing advice to help generate real cash flow. This podcast airs twice weekly on Mondays and Fridays, and if you aren't already a subscriber, go to iTunes or Apple Podcast, type in Old Dogs, spelled D-A-W-G-S, find our podcast, and subscribe. Well, we have a great show for you today. I'm so stoked. We have one of our return guests. Actually, this is the third return interview that we're having with this gentleman who is just a wealth of information. Everything from apartments to office buildings to mobile home parks, you name it. And I'm talking about Brian Murray, and I'm sure the name is familiar to you. He's the co-founder and key principal for Open Door Capital, a real estate investment firm founded by Brandon Turner, another previous guest on our show, and obviously everybody knows him from Bigger Pockets, that helps clients achieve superior returns through acquisition of value-add mobile home parks and apartment communities. Brian is also the founder and CEO of Washington Street Properties, a commercial real estate investment company that has been ranked on the Inc. 500 and 5,000 lists of the nation's fastest-growing private companies for 5 years. In 2015, Brian's achievements were recognized nationally when he was presented with a Gold Stevie Award for Executive of the Year in the real estate industry. He is author of the best-selling and award-winning book we've talked about on this show a number of times, Crushing It in Apartments and Commercial Real Estate. He is also the co-author of a new book called The Multifamily Millionaire, a 2-volume set which is now available for pre-order on biggerpockets.com and amazon.com. Well, Brian, welcome back to the Old Dogs REI Network.
Thanks, Bill. Really excited to be back. It's always great to talk to you.
Well, likewise. I always learn something new. I'm like in my student mode right now because there's always something new. But this new book sounds fantastic, and I was really stoked that I could get you on right before it comes out. It may the show may come out when it's already out there, but I wanted to hear everything I could about it. It sounds excellent. And I didn't mention it in the bio there, but your co-author is also Brandon Turner. So, both of you pretty prolific guys here, but I want to hear all about it. And, what you've been up to for the last couple of years. It's been since we've had you on our show. Just for those listening, his first appearance was in June of 2017, and it was a podcast entitled My First Real Estate Investment Was an Office Building. And the latest was Creative Financing Strategies for Commercial Real Estate in June 15th of 2019. So almost exactly 2 years from the last one and 4 years from the previous one. But tell us what you've been up to.
Yeah. So it's been a really crazy last couple of years. I made a pretty big change. It's just a little over 2 years ago. I got invited to a mastermind in Maui that Brandon Turner had organized. I had been on Bigger Pockets, I think, first time I think was back in 2015, so about 6 years ago. And I went back a second time when Crushing It in Apartments and Commercial Real Estate came out, and had stayed in touch with Brandon, and he invited me out to this mastermind. And we got out there, and I was talking about my plans to go into syndication for apartments. And at the same time, he was in the process of planning a launch of a syndication company for mobile home parks called Open Door Capital. And the more we talked, the more we realized we were kind of headed on similar paths and about to do the same thing. And hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could do that together? I think both of us kind of looked at the next few years and said, hey, if we put both of our heads together and do this, we could both go further than either one of us could on our own. And that's kind of when the rocket ship launched.
Wow.
Because it's been a crazy, crazy ride ever since. We did decide to focus on the mobile home parks, and we're just about to cross the 2,000 pad threshold, and with the parks we have under contract, we'll be over 3,000 pads by the end of the year.
Unbelievable. Wow.
Yeah, so it's been a wild ride, and a little ways through that process, we got talking about the fact that, hey, wouldn't it be great if there was some sort of comprehensive resource out there for people that wanted to invest in multifamily? And we kind of looked out there and said, no, there's a lot of great books out there, but none of them are really go A to Z, and they're all, we felt like they were all missing different important components, and just decided that we both felt like it could do a lot of good to again team up. And it wasn't originally intended to be a 2-volume set, but it is now. But the more we got into it, we realized that the processes for smaller multifamily were somewhat different than large multifamily, and in aggregate, the content, if we wanted to put something out that was comprehensive, really wasn't going to fit in one book. So we ended up with a 2-volume set, and the first is focused on small multifamily, and the second is on large. And what we did is Brandon did the first draft of Volume 1 for smaller multifamily, and I did the first draft for Volume 2 on larger multifamily, and then we swapped and helped each other out and put together something that I think is going to help a lot of people.
Wow. Well, just reading sort of the descriptive points for the book, it was just blowing me away. I mean, just you really sound like you broke it down into even a 5-year type program, and step by step. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that, like you said, is not out there. There's a lot of real general, some great books have great sections on marketing, or maybe it's finding the key markets, emerging markets, or whatever it is. But this sounds like it's sort of just a comprehensive how-to, which makes it really appealing. But I'll tell you, Crushing It was very well written, and I think you did an excellent job on that. And the other, side of that, you're just kind of blows me away too with Brandon, because Brandon, he's like a rabbit the way he produces books sometimes. He's just like, no, I mean, not just books, but he writes articles, and he's just like one of those prolific writers, and a great writer at that. But working together, that had to be, and you're probably a little more laid back, than Brandon is. So that had to be an interesting, mesh, not only writing books together, but actually working on a company together.
Yeah. That might be the first time anyone's called me laid back. But you know what? It's not. There's definitely a grain of truth there when you put me next to Brandon, right? So, it's been fantastic working with Brandon. Like he's very gifted in a lot of ways, and our skill sets are very complementary. and we really share a lot of the same viewpoints and values, and I think our skill sets complement each other very, very well. But the book writing, that was that was quite an experience, because Brandon's a big believer in tracking things and having very clear goals and stretching for those goals. And so pretty early on when we agreed to do this, he said, you know what, like the way to get this done, because there was a lot of writing to do. And he said, the way to get this done is we really, let's put together a spreadsheet and let's commit. Like if we both commit to doing 1,000 words a day and we have to enter it into this spreadsheet every day, then we can hold each other accountable and we can see what the other one is doing. And yeah, so that was the beginning of, me getting put to shame. And what was crazy is that, Brandon, I would say he may be, he's certainly the most prolific content generator that I've ever encountered, and whether that be throwing out videos or social media content or coursework or seminars, but certainly books. And I just gained a whole new level of appreciation for him as an author and just how incredibly quick he can put out quality content. Brandon would go and he'd write a couple thousand words, and it'd take him like 2 hours, and I'd spend 10 hours that day, and maybe generate half as many words, and that was kind of the norm, although we're both fairly competitive people. So that spreadsheet I think turned out to be a good idea, because we had between us around 250,000 words that we had written by the time we got about 3 months in.
Wow.
It was a ton of work. And what it allowed us to do is kind of take our collective knowledge and get it all memorialized in these two books. And one of the other things that Brandon and I have in common is we're really both teachers at heart. Like we're highly motivated to try to help other people achieve what we've achieved, or even better, more than what we've achieved. And that was my goal when I put Crushing It out there. Now that was on a different timeline. It took me about 2 years to write, and it's like half as long as one volume of this set. But the goal was always, hey, I've learned a lot of difficult lessons along the way. I figured out what works, what doesn't work. Let me share everything I've learned so that other people can benefit from that and use bits and pieces of it to maybe make a few less mistakes than I did, or benefit as much as possible from that experience without having to go through it yourself. And that was the goal again here. It's been about 4 years since I put out Crushing It, and I've grown a lot in my investing. I'm working at a different level right now. We are about to close on the largest project I've ever been involved with to date. It's a 530 unit apartment complex in Houston. And even though I was doing things on what I thought was a big scale when I was running Washington Street Properties, and over these past 2 years since I've been on your show, I'm doing things in an even bigger scale, and I've learned a lot, and it's time to share everything. So I'm excited.
Oh, wow. I'm really excited for you, and I can't wait to read the books. That's amazing. Now, did you guys actually come up with a table of contents? Did you, when you were writing this 1,000, or were you just like, yeah. You had to have some sort of direction there, right?
Yeah, so we differ a little bit in our writing styles, but I would say I sort of gravitated more toward Brandon's style, and Brandon is very methodical and organized in how he produces a book, and he'll lay out the sequence of subjects and chapters, and then actually do like 3x5 cards with different sections that are going to go within the chapter, and do it in a very structured way. And I think I benefited from that. When I did Crushing It, it was kind of like dump everything out of my head and then kind of rearrange it in a flow that makes sense. I had a developmental editor for that book who really helped me adjust, move the content around in a way that flowed smoothly. But in this case, we did have the structure ahead of time, and we pretty much stuck with it because there really wasn't the need. We had it organized, and we knew what content we wanted to cover for the small multifamily versus the large multifamily. And it just all kind of flowed more easily once you have that structure. So I think if I did it the way I did my first book, I wouldn't have been able to do it in that amount of time. But this book was also published by Bigger Pockets, and when you have a publisher, they've got deadlines, and producing a 2-volume set in this time frame, it was really great that we were able to partner and conquer this as a team. And having that structure, I think, allowed us to meet the deadlines.
And that's great. That's great. Well, I don't want to rob the people of at least some of the content here that you cracked open with both of these books. What I like about it is the fact that you do have a sort of a start, and then you can progress as you get in the second book into much bigger properties and what have you. But are you, in the first volume, were you looking at, okay, here's an assumption, you've got somebody that maybe has little or no experience getting into real estate investing? Is that kind of where you started from, like a real step one for someone?
Yeah, absolutely. And the world of multifamily is so broad, and there's so many people who are at different stages. To write something comprehensive, I mean, that's kind of what we had to do. Some of the content in volume 2 would just be too complicated for someone who hasn't ever done this before. Whereas some of the content in volume 1 might seem, very basic to someone who's done a lot of deals. So we started at the very ground level, so that if you have no multifamily experience, or you're just getting started, maybe just have a handful of properties, you're gonna gain a lot. That said, when I got the first draft of volume 1 from Brandon, I've been doing this for a long time, and I picked up a few things. And so I do think there's stuff in both that everyone can benefit from. But it starts right off with it'll allow somebody to get their very first property. It's got strategies for growth, and there's some things that are just very different. The lending process is a great example. It's entirely different to borrow money for a duplex versus a 100-unit property. And what is really challenging as you grow in multifamily, I think there's so much knowledge out there that is just not really captured, but shared, between other people who have experience or through trial and error. And, for instance, I think I've got 3 or 4 chapters just on debt in volume 2. And it goes through all the sources of debt for large multifamily, and what are the pros and cons if you're going to do, CMBS debt versus agency debt, and what are those terms? What do they even mean? And how you can structure it, all the ways you can structure a deal for a large acquisition. Most of that stuff, it's really not I haven't seen it covered in depth anywhere else before, like a step-by-step lending process for large multifamily, exactly how those loans are reviewed, how you can put together your documentation, all the different lending sources, and what considerations that you need to have. We've even got content in there on property dispositions and how to manage risk, and just stuff that you really can't find out there in any other books right now. And that was the goal. So we wanted to make sure, I think combined, if you buy the two books, it's less than $50. They're nice hardcover books. It'll be the first hardcover books that Bigger Pockets has ever put out. But, my goal is that any investor reads these books, they're going to get the best ROI of any investment they've ever made in their entire lives. And I feel really good about that. Volume 2, one of the other things that I personally love is I've got a chapter in Volume 2 on value add. And when I wrote Crushing It, I had a lot of readers come back and they wanted very specific ways. They're like, can you give me some, what are some of your best tips? Like if I want to add value. And I just decided in this book, I'm gonna go to the nth degree on value add. So I did write a very thorough chapter on value add, but then we couldn't fit it in the book, but we included a link there for anybody who buys the book that they can go and download 3 supplements on value add. One on boosting rental income, one on boosting ancillary income, and one on lowering expenses. And each of those 3 supplements has 7 sections of ways to add value. And then within those sections are just dozens and dozens of very specific tips on how to boost the value of a multifamily. That's the kind of stuff I really love because it's super practical, and that's kind of where the rubber meets the road.
Do you have sort of additional tools, for example? I mean, do you have spreadsheets and things like that are accessible? I know sometimes Bigger Pockets does that, and others where you can go to a site and maybe get a good analysis sheet or something like that.
Yeah. So Brandon did an amazing job in Volume 1. He's got different tools that you can access, and he leveraged the Bigger Pockets community to get input. And he's got, for instance, a tool it will help you estimate typical expenses for a property. And there's a handful of other tools in there that are based on data and information that he gathered that are pretty awesome. In Volume 2, when we're looking at large multifamily, anybody out there who has done like a syndication would know that, hey, the software or the spreadsheets that you might use to do a pro forma for that are pretty darn complicated. So rather than try to develop something like that from scratch, we steer people toward about maybe 6 or 8 tools that are out there and well developed and available, that you could go and there's actually enough information in the book to build your own. But there's a lot of commercially available software tools that can allow you to do like a really advanced analysis. And so it wasn't our goal to compete with that. We want people to understand everything that goes into it, give you enough that if you really want to, you could build it on your own, but also let the readers know there's plenty of tools out there. And that's actually one of the themes of the advanced Volume 2 is that all these things that seem complicated that maybe you couldn't do, there's resources out there. If you're worried about doing a syndication, well, the most advanced part of that is probably all the paperwork involved. Well, guess what? There's plenty of syndication attorneys out there who would love to take that off your plate and do that for you. And that's just one example, but it's meant to take the fear out as well and let people know here's all the ways around any of the obstacles that you might encounter, and make it real for people that, hey, this is something you could really do.
Yeah, no, for some of our listeners out there that, again, our target, there are people 50 years of age and plus that are looking at real estate investing as a means to either supplement their retirement or maybe maximize their nest egg or create a legacy, maybe all those things. And where, taking a look at sort of Volume 1, I know there are those that are just intimidated. The thought of even starting with multifamily is kind of ominous for some people, thinking, well, I should get a few single-family homes under my belt or what have you. How would you address that, and how would the book be of value in maybe starting with multi as opposed to single-family?
Yeah. So there's a lot of discussion in volume 1, kind of comparing, contrasting, single family versus multifamily. And, I don't think there's ever been a book come out that could walk you through, as carefully the steps of getting your first multifamily property, what the pros and cons are, and how to actually do it. But I think the other thing that's pretty great is, the books don't necessarily assume that this is something that you want to do on your own. In fact, you're encouraged to look at third-party management, partnerships, different ways that you can sort of lighten the burden on you as an investor, particularly for people who are further along in their life. And even myself, who obviously I'm a very active investor, over the last couple of years, I've started to invest more and more passively, and I invest in other people's large deals as a limited partner. I think even if you're not going to do it yourself, having the knowledge of what goes into it and everything that it takes makes you more informed as a passive investor, and therefore be able to better evaluate where you're comfortable putting your money to work for you in multifamily. So whether it's something you want to roll up your sleeves and get involved in yourself, maybe you make the acquisition and then rely on other parties, and these books will help you understand what third parties you need, how to select a property manager, things like that are very practical. But they can also help you if you want to be entirely passive and, just having that understanding. And any educated investor is going to do better than someone that kind of goes in blindly. So to me, well worth the read, even if that's the direction you decide to go. Sure.
Well, what is the stack method? Do you recommend that this is a way to sort of build and get to that next stage? Can you elaborate a little bit? I want to just kind of pull some of the gems out of there that I think would be valuable to our listeners. Sure.
The stack method is something that Brandon came up with, and it's not complicated, but if you run through the numbers and look at it, it's surprising. But the idea with the stack method is that you start with a very small property. In the case of multifamily, you probably would start with a duplex, and you set a goal where each successive year you basically purchase double what you had the prior year. So in year 1, you'd have a duplex. In year 2, you might have a quadplex. Year 3, 8 units, or you could have different combinations. It doesn't have to be exact. And then what that does is it allows you to kind of like have a very clear goal, and to start off with something that seems manageable. And certainly, for instance, if you do that first duplex in year 1, the idea of doing 2 duplexes in year 2, or a quadplex, it's not as big of a leap as if you jumped right there. And that you successively build that. And the numbers are extraordinary, because what you're doing is you're growing at a compound rate. You're basically doubling every year. And what the book shows you is that someone who starts off in year 1 with, say, 2 units and actually follows the stack method and doubles it every year, in most cases, by the time you're to year 5, you can have financial freedom. And, if you're still working, you may have the option to just leave your job and live off of your real estate. And I think the beauty of it is kind of in its simplicity, and it's kind of shocking how those numbers look when you start to add it up, because there's not a lot of, this is something that you could make happen. And, there's not a lot of opportunities out there in this world to grow at that rate. And the reason The reason you can do that in real estate, of course, is leverage, right? You look at other types of investments you're using. If your retirement is entirely based on, say, stocks or bonds or things like that, that's 100% financed out of your pocket. But, that's why your listeners, all love the idea of real estate is you can leverage and you can achieve returns that are extraordinary because you can borrow other people's money and use that for your investments. And then when you can grow your portfolio at a compound rate while investing, and with that leverage, the financial returns when you go out 3, 5, 7 years are positively extraordinary. So that's why I'm in my 50s now, but I didn't even start until my late 30s, and I didn't get my second property until I was in my 40s. But I was able to leave my day employment and achieve financial freedom and build toward that's another thing I'll mention is the second volume is how to achieve generational wealth. And so if your listeners who may be a little further along in their lives are starting to think not just about themselves, and maybe at some point financial freedom may not be the goal. Some of them, many of them may have their retirement already taken care of or planned out. But where my mind has shifted is toward generational wealth. Like I want to leave a lasting impact. I want to try to make sure that, I can ensure a better life for my children, my grandchildren, and, do things that are going to leave a legacy. And so everybody's got different motivations, but, very applicable for people who are, a little further along in life as well.
Yeah, some other aspects I really like about this book too is that it doesn't. I mean, you could just go in with the sort of a scientific formula, kind of like you're saying with the stack method. It's just math, right? And you're looking at duplicate. Yep. But you bring in other things from both of your backgrounds, which I think is really a plus. For example, the creative financing techniques with low or no money down. Ideas of finding off-market deals, and you wouldn't normally have to put that in this book, but the fact that you're creating or at least sharing information that people can leverage if they don't have a lot to start with, or if they want to be able to sort of leverage and maximize what they do have. So I like that, the fact that you have these other things that are going on that are also valuable information to help out just anybody that might get started, whether they've got a nice nest egg already or whether they're just starting with nothing.
Yeah, and that was another transformation in my investing that happened right around right after the last time I was on the show. I initially grew a portfolio. My first property I acquired with my retirement savings, and I would add value and do refis to pull out cash and grow. But it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I actually started to do syndications, and it's kind of the reverse order for a lot of people. But I was a little late to the game in syndications, but basically a syndication is basically raising capital from investors and investing using other people's money. And you don't have to have a nest egg or touch your nest egg if you take that approach. And a lot of people who have, long careers and they've developed skills that can be applied in different ways in real estate, and bring that to the table, and they can team with other people for the skills they don't have. And syndication allows you to get into large properties, and normally, not all the time, it's not necessary, but many times you find partners to do that with. And then you raise that capital, and you can you actually purchase these large properties with no cash out of pocket. I was intimidated by that. I thought it sounded really complicated. And when you learn about syndications, you realize everybody uses all this jargon and they cite specific laws. And it sounds like you need to be a CPA or an attorney to even figure out how to do it, but it really isn't that complicated. And it's a path that a lot of people do take to get into multifamily when they don't have a lot of resources of their own.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I think we cover a lot on syndication in our podcast. And I think sometimes, people are just kind of, their eyes start to glaze over, some people, where they're just going, I just don't want to have to deal. I don't want to deal with investors and all the complications. But the idea of, getting that multifamily property, I mean, even, one property could generate a net worth of $1 million for somebody. And that kind of a thing is pretty amazing. And then the larger those properties are, the really kind of the less work is involved. You have a smaller, duplex, fourplex, even up to, small multis. There can be a lot more, even if you have a property manager, it can be just much more involved. Whereas, with the larger properties, of course, you can afford to get the best property management in there, and you can get people that literally will manage that for you, that you just have to touch base with. And of course, you have to have your checks and balances and make sure that these people are doing what they're supposed to do. But it really, I think, becomes even more passive the larger you go in terms of the number of units. Do you find that to be true?
Absolutely. In fact, when in volume 2 of the Multifamily Millionaire, we just make an assumption that you are going to use a third-party property manager, because if you have a management operation on that scale, that's an entirely separate business that you've built and need to run, and that probably requires an entire 2-volume separate set of books. But yeah, it's. You're exactly right, and you're going to end up outsourcing most of that. That doesn't mean that there's no work involved, but once the property closes, you're handing that property off to someone with experience who has a team that is going to take care of things for you. And with those syndications, another thing that I didn't experience early on in my investing career that I do now is there's something very fulfilling and rewarding about bringing all these people on your journey and creating wealth for all these. Some people are like, oh, I don't feel comfortable asking people to invest in my deals. But once you're doing it, you realize you're actually bringing them this opportunity and you're creating wealth for other people. There's some pressure, of course, you don't want to let anybody down, but I've been doing this for a long time, and this whole idea that on any given project, we're going to have dozens of other limited partners who you can help generate wealth for and help change the lives of all these other people while you're making money for yourself at the same time. That's been pretty fantastic.
Yeah, I've seen people, since I've been doing this, which hasn't been a long time, but in just that short period of time, people that were strictly passive LPs that just made tremendous amounts of money. I mean, really didn't have to do anything else, just from the deals they were in the multifamily space. So, it's very real. It is a little different market today than what I saw back in the 2016, 17, 18, so forth. But there's still tremendous returns that you're not going to find almost anywhere out there in the stock market or anything comparable.
Yeah. And, as your wealth grows, you recognize that there's this entire other benefit you get, which is the depreciation and be able to the tax advantages. So, I'm still actively investing, but I'm investing as much as a limited partner, I invest as a limited partner in all the deals that I syndicate just on principle. I've made a commitment that I'm going to put in money on the same terms as the investors, but I also invest in other people's deals that I have no involvement in as far as the general partnership. And I've been gradually shifting my investing more and more in that direction for that very reason. It's entirely passive. I've just never had a lot of luck with other types of investing. I swear every time I put money in the stock market, you're pretty much guaranteed for a historic downturn. And if I pick a stock, I should almost publish it so that everyone else can short it and make money. And it's nerve-wracking for me. So I love actually putting money in someone else's deal, let them take care of everything that's involved in it. And it's also kind of out of sight, out of mind. I get nervous, like, oh, if I'm invested in the stock market, like I get really nervous if there's a downturn, and I think should I sell? Should I not sell? And I've had a lot of luck so far putting money in other people's deals and let them do that. And so, yeah, lots of ways to make money through real estate. And that's one of them.
Yeah. I think COVID even demonstrated, even with all the things that were going on in the economy, and with all that happening, the multifamily was still just standing strong. And yeah, there were a few that maybe had to postpone some quarterly payments or to their investors. But those things were